Hi guys, it's Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network, coming to you for yet another Sunday session. Today's topic is 5 signs that your builder is going broke, and more importantly, how to spot the builder's cracks. Pun intended. Now, as you know, we cover a whole bunch of these topics every single month. So today we're going to go deep diving into what you're going to look for in your building contract. Now, before we do, what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of an insight or a little bit of an offering to say, I'm actually giving away 12 months worth of my mentoring in our property development formula program. So if you want to find out your chance to win, make sure you stay to the end of this presentation and we'll be giving you a little link that you can follow and that'll get you in the draw. Now we're offering a whole bunch of prizes along with that. And the reason for that is we're actually coming up to our 9th birthday. So I guess in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be celebrating that at our Brisbane meetup on the 21st of August. And so in the meantime, we're giving away lots and lots of prizes. We're giving away our annual memberships into our Property Developer Network. We're giving away annual memberships into our RenoSave discount card. We're giving away one-on-one mentoring with me. And of course, that major prize, which is the 12 months education and mentoring in the Property Development Formula Program. So for your chance to win, make sure you stay to the very, very end and we'll tell you exactly how to participate. Now, in the meantime, actually, do you know what? I'm going to say, let's do that now. Okay, so take a screenshot of this very slide. Don't go there now, just do a screenshot, take your QR code, copy this link down the bottom, propertydev.info/favorite Sunday session. If you can tell me about your favorite Sunday session, perhaps it's going to be this one, then that will give you in a chance to get in the draw. Now, make sure, as I said, you just load it up in the background and pause it while we do get on with the rest of the show. So that said, building contracts, okay? I guess statistics have told us for, quite some time, anecdotally, we're told that 1 in 5 builders actually go broke. Now, recently I actually came across a HIA submission that was dated all the way back in April 2015. It's a little bit dated, but it was actually, a submission to the Senate and Economics Reference Committee, basically saying, look, how the industry is going broke, but it was entitled, I just want to get paid. And the reason why they wanted to do that, they were promoting a whole bunch of things as to why builders are actually going broke. And so it gives us some real good insights into how many go broke, how often they go broke, why they go broke, etc. So I'm going to share some of that with you today and then tell you why, even though that was dated back in 2015, why that situation's actually getting worse right now and what you can do to spot the building cracks, okay? Now, in that report, okay, what they identified was that the survival rate in the building and construction industry was only 71%, okay? And when they say survival rate, they mean 3 or more years, okay? What that means is 29% of builders, so it's bigger than that 1 in 5 that everybody talks about anecdotally. So 29% of builders actually go broke, and they gave a whole range of reasons. But if we want to simplify it down to just 5 reasons, it's cash flow, capitalization, poor financial control, poor business management, and trying to trade losses from previous works because of the other 4 dot points. Now, the HIA went into a huge amount of detail as to what, what was actually causing this. And it really came down to, when you go into the nitty gritty, estimating errors were probably one of the biggest issues and challenges in there. And the reason for those estimating errors is the fact that you quote at a certain point in time, and then the market changes. The dynamics change with regards to the materials, with regards to labor availability, and the whole bunch of things like that. And so if you make a very, very minor error, in that estimating element up front, that has this huge knock-on effect all the way along, okay? And so what builders were tending to do is get into bad habits as a result of those estimating errors, and they're relying on deposits and progress claims and that sort of thing in order to continue funding the business. So, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul in their process. What they found was that gets exacerbated when they are actually in a building boom. And guess what? we're in a building boom. So we're going to talk to some of the elements of that and why right now that's even worse than it is typically. Okay. Now, the reason, I guess, that today is really worse than ever, that building boom has created a whole bunch of pain points. Okay. So material costs, for example, are going through the roof. Okay. Now there's a lot of building and construction materials actually used on site. But I guess the three that are taking the biggest hit: concrete, steel, and timber. Now, concrete is up, depending upon where you are in the country, anywhere from 5 to 10%. Steel is up anywhere from 10 to 15%, and timber is up anywhere up to 50%. Now, it's timber that's really, really interesting because there's a couple of impacts that have been pushing on, I guess, the timber. Traditionally, we have been very self-sufficient in Australia with being able to, I guess, sustain ourselves with our own timber sourced within Australia. And I guess only 1/5 of our timber has actually been imported typically. Problem is that our bushfires back in 2020 actually had a massive impact on some of the supply of that. But a global boom in building and construction caused by, I guess, governments trying to provide incentives across the world to prop up economics and economies and that sort of thing, has meant that timber shortages around the world are quite high. As a matter of fact, in the US, the timber prices have gone anywhere from 250 to 400% increase in costs in the last 12 months. So as a result of that, our local timber suppliers are starting to supply overseas markets because they can actually make more money by doing that, which then creates more of a shortage here. Okay. Now, I guess on top of that, we've got, I guess, the impacts of COVID-19. Now, whilst most of us will know, I guess, how that's impacting us on a day-to-day basis, you want to start to think about this with regards to how this is impacting, I guess, hundreds of individual businesses and the knock-on effect that actually has. Okay. So the start-stop nature of labor means that it's not only just that start-stop nature of labor on the job site itself, but it's also that start-stop nature all the way through the supply chain. So, so the person chopping down the timber, less time that they're actually there. The person milling the timber, less time that they're actually there. The person actually turning that into a truss, less time that they're actually on site. So all of these knock-on effects are starting to have massive, massive impacts all the way across the, I guess, the board. Okay. On top of that, in Australia, we tend to import a lot of our goods from overseas, and the freight costs of our 40-foot shipping containers, where we get, wherever we get our source from, but a lot of it is from China, but other places as well. The cost, according to the Drewry World Container Index, the cost of freight is up 6 times higher than it was 12 months ago. So when we're bringing materials in, even if we can buy it for the same price overseas, by the time we actually bring it in, the freight costs have gone up. So all of this is starting to compound. And then there's, I guess, some serendipitous type things where, through no intended outcome, but all of the world governments, with the exception of Australia, we're terrible at this, are trying to do, so what they call the International Energy Agency, or the IEA, they're trying to push, I guess, the world's greenhouse sustainability down to a net zero. And as a result of that, that's having some impacts in changing how our workplace is actually done. So how materials are done, how they actually get around, and that's creating a little bit of both a lag and also an increase in costs in how some of the materials are actually made. And then on top of that, locally, I guess the cost of labor has actually gone up through the roof. And the reason for that is because the government has provided a whole bunch of stimulus packages through our home builder grants to spike up the construction rate, because it was in a massive, massive hole 12 months ago. And as a result of that, our local labor market has gone up anywhere from 15 to 30%, depending upon the individual trade that you're in. So all of that compounds. That then means, well, the cost of all the building and the cost of all the labor, whether it be materials or labor, is going up through the roof. Now, whilst that means, I guess, some big impacts to new contracts coming through, the big problem for the builders is the existing contracts that are already in place. Now, the existing contracts that are already in place, most of us are indoctrinated into, we want fixed price building contracts, which means that the builder is actually exposed to that. Now, because of that, they're trying to absorb the cost of the labor and then try to absorb the cost of the, I guess, the materials going up, and there's just not enough fat in the deal. Now, a recent presentation by the Master Builders Association of Victoria said that those increased building costs were causing a lot of builders to actually go broke. Now, the stats for Victoria alone, okay, now you've got to think that this has got to be compounded around Australia. For the first 4 months of 2021, there were 145 building and construction insolvencies in Victoria. 145 in Victoria alone. That is up 34.3% on the same time last year. Now, remember that we already had, I guess, as a best case scenario, 29% of builders going broke. Now there's a 34% increase in that actually happening. So as a result of that, if you are in a building contract right now, you want to be really paying attention to this presentation. And if you're about to get into one, then you should equally get into one and start to think, well, how can I actually work with the builder and how do I actually understand what I'm actually going to do? So all of these additional stresses on the builder at present mean that there's going to be time delays and material delays, and so time delays, I should say, and material supply, and also availability of the labor is actually going up, which has both cost impacts on materials and labor. Okay, the net impact is that the builder has to absorb it, and because of the time delay, they are more likely to trigger liquidated damages, because more likely that the building contract is actually going to run over time as project timelines blow out. And I guess the inability to claim additional costs associated with the rise of materials because they have fixed price contracts in place, which is just putting an insane amount of pressure on our builders. And it's understandable why that's actually impacting them and why that could be, I guess, why they're actually going broke. So with the result of that, whenever we're trying to get into a building contract, we want to make sure that we are getting in with a builder that has got enough, I guess, history, sustainability, cash flow, all those sorts of things to make sure that they can absorb this, that they've got, I guess, those internal processes in place. They've got the, I guess, the appropriate estimating tools and techniques and project management tools, etc., to be able to absorb this when they're actually tendering for the building contract in the first place. So you want to do a whole bunch of research on your builder before you choose them, okay? So you want to start looking at their building licenses. Now, each state has their own relevant building authority. So in the majority of instances, you can search for the builder's license. You can look up how many typical houses they build in any one particular year. And you want to start to go, well, has there been a significant variation in those number of builds? So for example, did they used to do 20 and all of a sudden they've jumped up to 50? Well, now their exposure is, you know, a bucket load more. Now that means that they might be outgrowing themselves. Now you would think that's a good thing, but if they haven't yet got their processes in place, that could be actually challenging. Equally, look for the opposite. What happens if they've actually started to drop the number of projects they've actually got? Maybe they've proven to themselves that they can't sustain that. They're trying to drop down to another bracket where they can actually do that. But either way, it's a conversation starter, and you want to start to understand how and why that's actually happening, okay? You also want to look on their license to see whether or not they've had any defaults against their name, and if so, what for? Was it complaints from an individual about the faulty workmanship? Was it complaints about time delays? Was it complaints about costs? See whether, firstly, what was the complaint? What was the resolution? Make sure that you use that as a conversation starter for your builder. And where possible, go and talk to that client and understand, I guess, whether or not that was appropriately resolved, because everyone has problems. None of us are perfect, but it's how we solve those problems that is really important, okay? You also want to be looking to see whether or not they're actually licensed for the size project that you're actually running. So you might be running a six-pack townhouse project, but if the builder is typically only doing, I guess, 1 or 2 spec homes at a time, and this is them stepping up, that might be inappropriate. Equally, if you're starting to do an apartment complex and they've only ever done townhouses before, never done a basement, you want to start to question whether or not they've actually got the skills to actually do that. You also want to be looking at when you go out to tender, which you should be going out to tender and getting expressions of interest on your build price. You want to have a look at why they might be so much cheaper than everybody else. Now, if you see a building contract that is 15% cheaper than all the other builders, that is a massive alarm bell, okay? The old adage, it's too good to be true, is probably right. They've probably missed something massive on their build contract, and it's likely to come back and sting them later on. And if it stings them, that means it's going to sting you. So you don't want people who are too high and you don't want people who are too low, but just like Goldilocks, you want people that are just right, okay? So make sure that when you're doing your tender assessments, you sanity check them against the other respondents and make sure that there's no massive variations. And also, where appropriate, take it out to a quantity surveyor to get that quantity surveyor to anoint whether or not the response that they've given is actually in alignment with what they should be expecting in the market right here, right now. One of the other things to be mindful of is in the building contract, are they asking for upfront payments? So if they're asking for upfront payments for things like materials so they can start the process and things like that, that's generally a no-no. They're trying to potentially cash flow other projects, which means at some point in time, they're going to be needing to ask someone else for money to cash flow yours. And if that someone else doesn't supply it, that could actually be a problem. Typically, you're going to be paying for your installment payments after the work is done, not before, with the exception of the deposit to actually, I guess, kickstart the project in the first place, okay? Make sure you also look at a lot of recent customer reviews, especially in the last 3 to 6 months, because it's the last 3 to 6 months where they're going to be showing, I guess, the hugest amount of stress if they are under stress. But you want to go further back, but pay really, really close attention to the most recent ones. And definitely go get some references, okay? So not only ask for references, but actually go and actively seek references. When you look up their builder's license, you should be able to see a list of the projects that they've actually done. So go knock on the door of those particular clients and actually have a chat, okay? Visit the sites that they might be actually currently running right now. Talk to both current and previous clients. You want to go have a look at sites that are underway, and you also want to have a look at sites that are finished and make sure that the quality of the work is there. Now, when you're going underway, you want to be looking for things like activity on site, and are there lots of things actually happening? How clean the site is? Are they being proactive in how they're actually managing their projects, etc. So all of those are research for before you actually choose the builder. Problem is, what happens if you've already chosen the builder and you're halfway through the project and you're not sure whether or not that they can actually manage all the way through? So as promised, here are the 5 signs that they are actually going to be going broke. Number 1, activity on the site is actually slowing down, okay? So when you turn up on site, there's no tradies to be seen, okay, or very few of them. So you would anticipate a whole bunch of activity, but no tradies there. That's generally a sign that tradies are not getting paid, okay? So if you also see lack of activity, like the bins aren't getting emptied, or anything that's been hired, like crib huts, forklifts, scaffolding, all those sorts of things, if they start to get removed by, I guess the suppliers, generally that means the suppliers think that they're not getting paid as well. So you want to start to think about those things. If they're starting to get removed from site very, very early in the process, start scratching your head and going, is this right? Okay, so activity on site slowing down. Next one, new project manager might appear, okay? So project manager / superintendent, now they might, I guess they might be changed over because the previous project manager had a good working relationship with his subbies, and he can't stand by and see them actually getting ripped off, seeing the subbies not actually getting paid. So he's going to have that really close working relationship with the subbies. And so if you see that project manager turn over, then you want to start to go looking for the old project manager and see whether or not you can actually find him. Usually you've got his phone number. and ask him why he actually left site. See if you can actually have, I guess, a good integrity conversation with him. Sometimes they're going to be very reluctant to talk about the true reasons why they left, but see whether or not you can see what's happening from their perspective, okay? Because they're going to see the inside running of actually what's happening in there, okay? I guess similar to, so that was number 2, similar to a new project manager actually appearing on site, have a look for new subcontractors turning up on site. Let's just say that you had one plumber doing the work before, and all of a sudden, new plumber turns up, okay? Now, this is a really obvious one because at this point, I guess it's an indication that they weren't able to pay the previous plumber, and any work that's still owing to them, they may be able to get the sign-off and certification from the new plumber coming in, and that will help them get the progress, I guess, of the project moving forward and get the appropriate sign-offs. But they still owe the money to the previous guy. Okay, so you want to be very careful of that. So always get to know who your subbies are on site. The Sparky, the plumber, I guess the chippy, all that sort of thing. You want to make sure that you're turning up very regularly to see those guys. And when somebody new turns up, keep a close eye out. So that's number 3. False or irregular payment claims. Okay, this is probably the biggest alarm bell if you start to see this. So progress claims are put in for works that are not yet completed. Now, when you're doing very small projects, you are the one who's going to be assessing whether or not the progress claim is actually appropriate. As you start to get larger project claims, you're probably going to have a quantity surveyor measuring whether or not that is actually there. But if you are doing it and you don't really know how to tell, are we 30% complete, are we 50% complete, etc., it's very easy for a builder to actually slide that through and say, look, I'm after a payment claim for works that are not yet done. Okay, so next one would be, I guess, along the same lines, that you're asked to make payment for materials in advance. Now, as I said before, you should only be paying for a deposit in advance. Everything else should be, I guess, a payment claim after it's actually been supplied and installed, okay? And so if you're being asked to make payments on materials that are not yet there, that's generally a good indication of cash flow issues for your builder. The other thing with false and irregular payments would be if you're being stung for variations that are unreasonable. So you asked for this tiny little thing, and all of a sudden the price point for that tiny variation is massive. That is a very big clue. So that's number 4, false or irregular payment claims. And number 5, they don't return your call, they don't return your email, they're just missing in action, okay? So I guess, understand what is their regular timeline that they're actually coming back to me. If it's regularly that they come back in 2 days, then don't panic if they're still taking 2 days. But if all of a sudden they're taking a week, that's terrible. Generally though, most builders should be fairly responsive, and when you give them a phone call, with the exception of if they're in a meeting or if they're, I guess, in the middle of something particularly on the spot, they will generally take your phone call on the spot or at least return it same day. So be very cognizant of those. So there are your 5 signs. Activity is slow, new project manager appears on site, new subcontractors might appear on site, false or irregular claims, and they don't return your calls and they start to go AWOL. So there are your the 5 areas, guys. So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, there's a whole bunch of terms that we, I guess, generally always want to be putting into our contract to make sure that we are protected. So we're constantly drummed into us that these are the things that we want to put in there. So let me talk about these. So we want to make sure that it's a fixed priced contract, okay? So if it's a fixed price contract, we are very protected with regards to, I guess, what that build contract is going to cover. We want to make sure we've got liquidated damages in there. Liquidated damages, I guess, understand the true cost of the delays. So you want to be capturing holding costs, land tax, rates, interest of your project, that sort of thing. So make sure if the project runs late that you're actually coming that. Now, note to self, you're not allowed to profit from liquidated damages, so it has to be fair and reasonable. And where possible, you want to be avoiding provisional sums and prime costs in your contract so that you can put as much into that fixed price contract as you can. Problem with all of those is all of these terms and conditions are very much in favor of the developer, okay? And they push all of the risk onto the builder. And as I said, because of everything happening right now, that's creating a whole bunch of stress on the builder. And so if you're going into a building contract, understand that your builder is probably going to be putting a little bit more fat onto the build contract in order to cover those, because he's got to capture that risk, okay? So, and whilst you might be protected on paper by having those terms in the contract, if the builder goes broke, none of those things actually help you, despite the fact that you may have a legal claim on them, okay? So let's talk about your legal rights, okay? So your legal rights are all of those things. So you've got a fixed price contract, that the builder needs to be held to that. You've got liquidated damages, the builder needs to be held to that. So the only time that you can actually make claims, though, if the builder's starting to go broke, so the other, sorry, I forgot one element there. The other thing that you've got is also a compulsory homeowner's warranty insurance that you actually put in, I guess, in protecting the ultimate owner of the finished product. Okay, so sometimes we've actually got a claim under that as well. Now, generally, though, for us to make a claim for any of those elements, there has to actually be a breach in the contract. So we need to make sure that we understand what triggers a breach and what conditions they are, and keep a very close eye on whether that's actually there. Always, always, always make sure you seek legal advice in putting your contract together, and also seek legal advice on whether or not you think that breach has actually occurred. Now, the most common defaults, so the common things for builder when they're actually going broke is, oh my goodness, it's not about the liquidated damages anymore. It's not about the costs. It's about, oh my goodness, my project stopped. What do I do? Can I replace the builder? Can I get somebody else in? So that's probably the one that we're the most scared about right up front. Now, in doing so, that gets really, really tricky in order to replace the builder, okay? So typically you can only replace the builder when there's specific instances that have occurred, and largely that you can prove that they've either disappeared, i.e. they're no longer responding to your phone calls, emails, messages, etc., in which case you're going to have to demonstrate pretty clear and conclusively that that's the case, and also report that through to the relevant building authority. They're going to equally have to prove that that's the case. Or the other one is that you've proved that they are either gone bankrupt or insolvent. Okay, so or lastly, if they actually have had their builder's license cancelled, that, you know, those ones are typically the only ways that you can actually have a builder replaced on a project. Okay, now if a builder is replaced, there's a whole bunch of pain coming your way. Okay. So the whole bunch of pain that's going to come your way is additional holding costs whilst you, I guess, try to find the new builder. That's going to take some time. It may not be you that's in charge of finding that. That might have to come under the homeowner's warranty insurance. So there's a process and a mechanism that's going to trigger there. So there's a whole bunch of holding costs that are going to happen there. So the challenge is in proving that that new builder coming in is not going to be in any worse situation. There's likely going to be a whole bunch of cost impacts with regards to the new builder coming in, so they might want to charge a little bit more for the process. All in all of this is actually hurting your bottom line. So you want to be really, really careful that that you don't let the builder go broke in the first place. That is the most critical element, because as soon as they're broke, it's too late. So it doesn't matter what legal clauses you've got sitting in there. If they have gone broke, you no longer have a claim against your liquidated damages, and you no longer have a claim against, I guess, all of the other things that are sitting there protecting you. Okay, so now in looking at some of those mechanisms to protect you, the tempting one that we think that we can make a claim on mostly is the homeowner's warranty insurance, which is compulsory in every single state, according to the building authority. The problem with this is it's not really intended to protect you as the developer. Rather, it's intended to protect the ultimate homeowner. So as such, it generally will only apply to residential contracts. So depending upon your state, that will typically be if you're doing a construction of less than 3 dwellings. Now, if you're doing less than 3 dwellings, then you as the developer might be protected under that homeowner's warranty insurance yourself, because you could say, well, I am the resident in this particular instance. However, and that's a big might, if it's more than that 3, in most states, that will actually trigger the fact that it is actually a commercial contract. Even if you've written it on a standard residential legal document, the building authority is going to say, look, these are commercial terms, not otherwise. And so you as the developer are likely not going to be protected under that homeowner's warranty insurance, okay? Which means that it's going to be completely up to you to find the new builder and for you to replace them, and the building board's not going to actually look after you for that, okay? So I guess this gives you a bit of so you've got your legal situation, but now you've got a moral dilemma. You say, well, yes, I'm legally protected. I've got my fixed price contract. I've got my liquidated damages. I've got my homeowner's warranty insurance. So legally you might be protected, but it doesn't actually help you if the builder falls over. So your job is to make sure that they don't fall over. Your job is to keep very, very close relationships with the builder, keep a very close eye on those 5 signs that I said before, and work with the builder as much as humanly possible so they don't fall over. Even if they fall over after you're gone, I guess at least you're protected. Now, I can speak to personal circumstances there where it was very clear that one of my builders was going broke early in the process, and we managed to get, I guess, limp them through to the end. And within 2 months of us finishing the project, they actually did go under. And so that would have caused me an insane amount of pain if it had happened during the project. So in order to do that, some proactive steps that you should be taking: you want to have regular site visits and understand what is actually happening. You want to have a look, is there a lot of activity on there? You want to see, are the tradies actually happening? You want to understand who the tradies are, have a working relationship with the tradies, okay? Understand whether or not the project is actually running on time, and keep a very close eye on what your project timelines are, where you should have in your building contract said to the builder, hey, we want to have a Gantt chart, which actually says, well, these are where our milestones are on their project. And you're going to be checking in on a regular basis to see why they're behind, and be able to have integrity conversations with them as to why they're behind. You also want to be fair and reasonable, okay? Whilst you have the legal ability to beat your builder up about the head, if you do so, you're just going to send him under. So be fair and reasonable, okay? If you're able to absorb some of the costs of the materials and some of the costs of the labor, that may allow the builder to actually keep the project moving and actually get through to the end. Now, I understand that that's a hit on you and your budget didn't actually allow for that, but recognize that right now we are in a hot market. So the sales prices are going up way through the roof, and chances are you're selling into a market that's way higher than your original FISO. Now, because of that, you've got a little bit more wiggle room to move than your builder. So you've got to make the hard decision to say, well, am I willing to give away some of that extra uplift to keep the builder afloat? Because if I don't keep the builder afloat, I'm going to feel a whole bunch of pain. And if I feel that pain, then it is possible that that builder going under will actually cause me to go under as well, because I'll never actually get the project finished and may never get to realize my profits at all. So 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing, okay? Recognize when the builder comes to you that because the cost of the materials are going up, if they come to you and say, hey, I've got these alternate materials that are going to be a little bit more cost effective, recognize that that's an opportunity for you to cut costs, keep the builder with their margins intact, keep them afloat, keep them moving. And also recognize that because some of the building materials are going up, you might want to consider moving some of those elements into a prime costs or provisional sums type capacity, where you can say, look, we're going to pay a nominal rate for it, I guess, in the build contract, but when it comes to the actual time of purchasing those, we have to be realistic that the market has moved and that the price points may have gone up. Now, I understand that, I guess, we're all told not to do all of those things, okay? But remember, this is your moral situation, not your legal situation. And whilst you should protect yourself legally, absolutely categorically, as much as humanly possible, you should also be a fair and reasonable human being and make sure that you don't take the builder out in the process. Okay. So there you go, folks. Hoping that you got plenty out of that. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my screen and tell you that we run these Sunday sessions most Sundays with, I guess, a new topic every single month, and every week, and we migrate all of those over to YouTube. So there is a massive back catalogue of our Sunday sessions on YouTube. Go search for us at YouTube by typing in Property Developer Network, or alternatively, follow the short link that's sitting down there, propdev.info/YouTube, and that will get you there. Also, a huge announcement. There is a half-day event that I'm running on the 14th of August. We're calling it Escape Velocity. This is a free half-day event. This is going to be telling you what's happening in the market and where my market predictions actually are. Now, for those of you who've been following me for quite some time, you'll know that for the last couple of years, every 6 months or so, I make these big market predictions as to how and where it's going. And so far, fingers crossed, I've been pretty accurate in where it's going. I picked the fact that we were going to have the drop off at the start of COVID and how much that was going to be. While the banks were predicting anywhere from 20 to 30% drop, I said it was going to be somewhere between 5 and 10, and I was right. I predicted the bottom of the market and when it was actually going to start to boom again, and suggested to everyone now was a fantastic time to get in. And again, I got that right. I've also made a big, bold prediction that I'm going to be releasing at this Escape Velocity event. And so while we have had a massive building boom right now, I think that there is actually a second wave of building boom to come. And if you'd like to find out about that, and why I believe that, then why don't you come to this event? So follow the link down below, propdev.info/escape velocity. If you do that, register for that event. No doubt you'll see us promoting this over the next little while. So looking forward to seeing you all there. On top of that, we also run our monthly meetups in 3 states, so New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. So most weeks we are running a meetup somewhere. Now, where humanly possible, this is always physical. Where it's not possible, we will do that virtually. We have industry experts, we have people in our communities sharing real deals, and we also have a masterminding process to help you progress your property journey. So make sure that if you are interested in progressing your property development journey, you turn up to those meetups and we will try to help you forward. We also run a couple of Facebook groups, our Property Developer Network and development site Deal Hub. So you can stay in contact with us all the time at those. And I also, as I said, do run a 12-month education and mentoring program called Property Development Formula, which is what we are giving away for your chance to win if you rewind and follow that link. So that said, folks, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to Facebook land and see what questions I've actually got coming through from you guys, and where possible, answer your questions. Give me 2 secs. It's just taken a sec to get the questions up. Why is it that it's never fast when you want it, hey? But there's always a lag on these things, folks. So give me 2 secs while I get that get the questions up. There it is. Okay, give me 2 secs, folks. Okay, I can see a whole bunch of people saying hi. So Harry, Sean, Linda, Luke, Natalie, and a whole bunch more. So hi, folks. Really, really appreciate that. Luke Moroney says, boom. Hey, Luke, how are you doing, mate? Rizwan says, hi, Rob. Lumber prices in the US are falling. Is this going to have any effect on the Australian market? So it's starting to fall, Rizwan, but there's a massive delay in that. And as I touched on before, the Aussie market has been pushing our lumber over there. So it will come back to us eventually, but that's taking its time to actually get there. So in the longer term, yes. In the shorter term, no. Okay. As I said before, most of the time we have been self-sustaining internally. And so it's going to get to a point where we're going to be supplying our own network again, so our own internal construction industry. But while we are still exporting, while that differential is still there, then our local market is still going to get impacted. But watch this space, it will come back. Natalie says, hi Rob, how could we find builders' previous projects? So Natalie, what you'll need to do is find your relevant building authority. There's different building authorities in each state, and do a license search on the builder. Okay, now for the majority of states, that license search will give you their history, how long they've been around, what their financials are, some of them will give you an actual list of projects themselves. If not, ask the builder for that. But they'll definitely give you what the defaults are and what the remedies to the default are, whether or not that default is actually still outstanding. Matt says, how do I successfully ask for a copy of the builder's balance sheet on them for my accountant to review for sufficiency? Matt, you ask the question and just say, look, due to the size of this project, I'm going to need to see your financials for the last couple of years. If they are not willing to share that, that's probably not the builder that you want to go with, because there's got something to hide. It's really just a matter of asking a question. Do they have a legal responsibility to supply? The answer is absolutely no. But if they want the work and their financials are up to date, there should be no reasons why they wouldn't actually provide that. The more of us that actually ask for that, the more it's going to become the norm, and especially when, and in the, I guess, the commercial world where the projects are very, very big, it is the norm. It's not necessarily the norm in the smaller projects. So the more of us that actually start to ask for that, the more it's going to be, I guess, commonplace, the more likely you're actually going to get that accepted. Tim says, how do we use the regulator to find previous job sites? Touched on that one just a sec, Tim, when I answered Natalie, but you can do a search for the builder's license on your relevant building authority. Linda says, really great to hear your perspective, both sides of the contract. You're welcome, Linda. It is, whilst we are here to make profit, we're not here to cause harm. And if the builder gets hurt, then we are also going to get hurt. So it's one of those things that we have to be fair and reasonable. So Robert says, hi, Rob. So hi, Robert, how are you? Tim says, thanks, Rob. This has been great. As per our last chat, I'm in the middle of a dispute with my builder, so prime time for me to learn. Made lots of notes on today's session. The next steps for me is turning these learnings and notes into action steps for me to move forward and tighten the contract and building works. So great work, Tim. Glad that you got plenty out of it, mate. That is 100%, I guess, the intent. Justin says, hi, Rob. My builder has stated my new project would take around 10 months to complete, but wants to only commit to 14 months in the contract. Is this a red flag? Justin, yes, it's a red flag, absolutely. However, I guess because of all the reasons I've explained, there are, I guess, lag in materials actually coming to site, and there also are a lag with regards to the contractors. And so what he's trying to do is make sure that he's not going to get unfairly penalized because those lags are actually sitting in the market. Now, 10 months to 14, that's a little bit of a stretch, okay? And so my guidance here would be to have a little bit of an integrity conversation and say, look, that's a little bit too hard. Here's what I'll do. And I'm very much, I've tried to play very fairly on both sides of the fence. Here's a proposition. I have liquidated damages to penalize you if you're late based on what the holding costs are for me on the project. So what if, sorry, itchy nose, what if I did the opposite? What if I actually gave you an incentive to finish early? Because those holding costs that are going to hurt me if it runs late are equally savings to me if the project finishes early. So let's find a fair and reasonable timeline that we can both work with. And if you finish early, then I'll give you the equal amount to liquidated damages each day you finish early. Now, at this point, you've got both a carrot and a stick, and it's the same carrot that is the stick. So they are going to be much more incentivized on actually trying to finish ahead of schedule. They're going to do everything within their power to try and bring it forward, and that's going to help both sides. So hoping that helps, Justin. David says, hi, Rob. If you're using a prefab builder and they get broke, then what? Oh, David, that one's really tricky because prefab is pretty custom, mate. And another prefab builder taking over from a previous prefab, they're not going to be able to have access into the same factory and the like. So tricky, tricky, tricky. I don't have an answer for that. Yeah, but the concept of prefab, I guess, is not necessarily a saving in costs, but rather it's more a concept in saving in time. And so you might instead have a different relationship with those guys to say, well, I will pay for the materials when I see them actually physically in place, and I need to have an alternate installer other than yourself who is licensed to be able to take over if you go broke. So you're only paying when you see, I guess, the elements there. But having not done that one before, mate, I guess I don't have an actual solid answer on that, but hopefully that's enough to give you, I guess, the insights you want. Vu says, hi, HWI is intended to cover 3 dwellings or less. Is there any point in getting HWI for projects with 3 or more dwellings? How do I get this cover for projects with 3 or more dwellings? So Vu, it is a compulsory homeowners warranty insurance that every builder must pay irrespective, and you inherently have to pay the builder because the builder has to do that before doing the works. It is not intended for you. It's intended for the ultimate purchaser who buys the property to be protected for 6+ years, depending upon your state, to make sure that the foundations are right, to make sure that the roof doesn't leak, all those sorts of things. So it's actually protecting them, not you, okay? So it will always be a compulsory part of the build contract. The question is whether or not you can tap into that. Now, you can certainly go to an insurance broker and actually ask for you to be protected if you're doing more than 3 builds. It will be quite expensive, letting you know that that is the case. And I guess depending upon the risk profile that you've actually got, the profit in the deal, that sort of thing, that is something to very heavily consider whether or not you want to take out private insurance over and above for you as the developer in case the builder goes broke, okay? Julie says, would you request a credit report from the builder as part of your due diligence? The answer is yes. And any advantage in requesting builder undertakes your building project in a separate entity, i.e. Has multiple project builds, and are there any advantages in requesting the builder undertake? Julie, I guess giving legal and accounting advice on what someone else should do, and especially the builder, is probably not inside my remit. I guess that's up to the builder and his accountant as to whether or not they're going to do it in a separate entity. However, remember, if they're going to set up a separate entity, that's going to be a $2 shelf company, have no assets in it. And so if they actually do go broke, very, very hard for you to pursue. You're probably better off to have them still doing it in their standard building entity where there might be some assets and there might be an ability for you to claim at all. But I guess, yeah, hoping that helps with that one. Robert says, I'm just about to put a XXX in Sydney out to tender. Is it normal to put in allowance items to make sure all of the tendering on the same thing, i.e. ducted AC ×3, et cetera, et cetera. So Robert, where that gets interesting, mate, is you might say ducted aircon, but there's a cheap quality, there's a medium quality, there's a high quality. So if you just say ducted aircon, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to come back with the exact same spec. If you instead say, look, I want this particular brand, this particular make, this particular model, now everyone's quoting on the exact same thing. You know exactly what it is that you're actually measuring on. And you could then say, open to alternative suggestions if you believe that there is a more cost-effective solution. So that way you can measure everyone on a like for like, and then you can look at what is their preferred supplier, what is their preferred, and then you can make a quality decision to say, well, is the saving worth the quality of what it is that we're actually putting in? Hoping that helps. Prashant says, hi, Rob. Hey, mate, how are you? In terms of liquidated damages, can they use COVID as an excuse due to the on and off lockdowns? Oh, that's legal, Prashant. I honestly don't know. They are generally, in most contracts, I guess, acts of God type things, and also government, government triggers to say, well, if the government has shut me down, such as in Sydney where they locked down the construction for 2 weeks, that would generally be something where they could actually exclude it. But unless the government has stated thou shalt not go to work, going to be very, very hard, I would imagine. I guess not inside my skill set to comment any further than that, but hopefully that gives a little bit of guidance on that. Ross says, hi, Rob, great notes, rebuilders. Is there a checklist on the PDN site for us to refer to? No, Ross, there is not. I guess these Sunday sessions are really meant, I guess, to be consumed audibly. If I was putting together all of my notes and giving all of that away, there would be nothing to put inside my 12-month program. So hoping that this adds value to you without actually giving away all of my IP, mate. So hoping that helps. Tim says, a good call, Ross, specifically the components of liquidated damages. Again, similar answer, Tim. So Natalie says, can we add in the special conditions a requirement for the builder to provide a quote, then invoice of the work that was required plus their margin? You can ask for that. You can't mandate what their margin is. It is up to them to be able to make as much money or as little money as they're willing to take on. However, where you put in things like provisional sum type items, generally you would say cost plus X. Okay, now there are cost plus contracts, which I would say be very, very careful of, because you're exposing yourself to, I guess, an unknown outcome. So you want to potentially just consider very, very small components of that where you think those costs might be, I guess, at risk, and that you are wanting to be fair and reasonable with your builder on. And for those items, if they're in that PC area, then yes, you can actually, they would declare what that margin is. Peter says, use non-union labor as they can work weekends. Actually, Peter, I won't get into the use union or not union because that's political. What I would say, though, is that every single jurisdiction has requirements about not working weekends because it's going to make noise that impacts the neighbours. And so generally it's not an issue of the union, but rather the local jurisdiction as to what is and isn't allowed. There's only certain hours that you're actually allowed to work. So anyway, folks, that appears to be the end of the questions. So given that's the case, thank you once again for this Sunday session. If you want your chance to win our 12-month property development formula program, rewind all the way back and have a look at that QR code and follow that link. Give us your comments on what your favorite Sunday session is. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye for now.